So it's been a week since the last podcast, and we've seen that the world elites got really, really unhappy with this period of time. Alexey, and the reason for that is this mass wave of information about the court case in Chelyabinsk, which exposed much more than originally was presumed. It showed that the whole master plan of the people who fabricated case against creative society and against humanity is falling apart. And it's fallen apart because too many people have been voicing truth. First at the international online conferences and forums by creative society, and then this information becomes well known by people around the world. And it's really impossible to manipulate people once they know the truth. So what has been revealed, first of all, is how the case was fabricated itself in Chelyabinsk region, where the world elites were planning to do this step-by-step play and eventually ban creative society by claiming that it is illegal missionary activity. For that purpose, the whole incident was played using their local puppets. And it was a setup for Russian Orthodox Church because they were working through their people inside of the church. And they fabricated a case using some old ladies. So in the small regional city of Plast in Chelyabinsk, there was a lady, a volunteer of Creative Society, who was given promotion materials about the Creative Society, about the benefits of this project to the people who would visit her store. And turns out there was one granny who came, saw the paper, didn't like it, called the police. Within 10 minutes, the police was already there at the store. So by the time the participant of the Creative Society project was stepping out and closing the store, the police car was already there with no running engine. It was just sitting there waiting for her. And Alexey, I don't know about you, but police doesn't come where I live in the United States within 10 minutes on such cases. You know, it seems like they caught all the criminals, solved all the cases. You would think if they react with such a tremendously fast pace on some brochure. What was done later, she was questioned, she was called into the police department, and then she was offered to sign the paper, which looked like nothing she was actually telling. So she rejected and refused to sign that paper. Then the police came into the store next day, calling her into the court. And then the court turns out that the granny herself never showed up. There were, out of nowhere, 3 different witnesses who turned out to be the people who know each other and who are students and teachers and co-workers. And those 3 persons started attacking the Creative Society movement, trying to make connection to Allatra, and eventually call them both religious organizations. And for some reason, there was this history teacher who also works for the local church as a missionary department chief. There was a police department anti-extremist chief, who's also the student of the historian teacher by coincidence, and works as a sub-diacon in local church. And there was a lady who is so-called expert in everything and nothing, and she co-authored multiple books with the very same history teacher, who's also a missionary department worker in this Russian Orthodox Church. So this group, all of a sudden, of witnesses who knew each other, turned out they're sleeping in bed with a judge and local police department officers, and they all know each other. They all, this clique, are in the same bed, and they fabricate in this case as soon as possible to just label Creative Society as a religious missionary activity and eventually ban it, with a plan to ban it in this region and the whole country. It looks like it's all been a setup from the very beginning. And why is that? Why are they trying to attack it so much in such a distant region? Well, you know, if you look how the elite works, they always work from some small city, small town, or whatever. Like over 20 years ago, when the whole case with CO2 as the root cause of all evil was just being played for the first time, and when they started calling the CO2 gas a pollutant, they had no evidence, there was no basis, it was a ridiculous claim. But they found one fresh out of college professor who just received his PhD in climatology, and he made up this fraudulent graph called hockey stick. somewhere in Pennsylvania. And he was about to go to Virginia to some small college to teach over there. But the elites took this study and promoted it using IPCC, using all possible media resources, and made the hugest, biggest deal out of this fraudulent graph and made the whole story with CO2 taxations. And look where we got right now, where they were trying to convince everyone to eat insects, stop raising cattle, and eventually we know what it leads to. It leads to a mass hunger, it leads to lack of food, it leads to distortion of the truth. People were misled, and lots of money, billions and trillions of dollars were made. So never underestimate the location and the fact that it was somewhere in a distant regional city in Russia. The matter of this case is much bigger than what it seems. And I'm happy that volunteers and participants of the project, Creative Society, Allatra, and many other people, they actually understood the game that is being played here, and they voiced the facts out loud. This is something that, many politicians were afraid to speak up about it. And Alex, why do you think it is that the politicians were afraid to speak about these elites, but the people are speaking up with no fear?
First, I wanted to address that the thing that now we are seeing this as a pattern, and we will in a couple of minutes explain what is this pattern and how they are proceeding all the time. But if we go back in history, not so long ago actually, it's considered modern history, two heads of the United States already started speaking about this sect, this radical sect. And the first one was JFK. And we know that as soon as he started talking about what is happening, he was killed. He actually was also saying things that are similar to what Creative Society is saying about how people should live. He also talked about the First Amendment, that the founding fathers also knew about this sect, how it operates. This is why they insisted on the First Amendment to be included in the Constitution of the United States, so that this sect of guardians or architects of this world, as some call them, so they cannot interfere. But we are still seeing that they're shutting people up completely. And the second person who almost started talking about this was Ronald Reagan, but we could say that he was bought, because as soon as he became president, he was never talking about these ideas anymore. And this is interesting. But when we look at how the anthropogenic CO2 theory was made the dominant theory, they needed to create an expert. And to create an expert, they chose one guy whose works were heavily promoted. But as we spoke from the very first episode of this podcast, the data was completely manipulated and the reality has nothing to do with this. Yet they are talking about the consensus of 99% of scientists. But who are these scientists they are not talking about? It's just to say 99% of scientists are in consensus.
Yeah, it's very easy to have consensus when you shut down everyone who's disagreeing with you.
Yeah, when you're killing everyone else, well, people who just start talking, they don't speak anymore because they see what's happening. It's like these funny videos with the dog. They put some food in the bowl and then they take a plush toy of a deer or something like that. And they show to the dog that the plush toy was kind of eating this food, and then it tips over and dies, and the dog spits out the food. So the same thing sadly happens to everything, to fuel-free generators. And we also talked about this, that people are just afraid of telling what they have found, what they have developed. And going back to creating the expert opinion, the same thing is happening with Creative Society and Allatra. But the strange and funny thing is that BBC chose as their experts two articles written in very distant places in Russia and Ukraine. The same thing, the bashing of Allatra International Public Movements also started from one article in one, I don't remember if it was a Czech Republic blog or something like that, and everyone was referring to this article. But people are not looking any further, because we are being told, trust the experts. And this is the problem, that when we are not doing our own research, we are trusting the experts. It turns out that the experts are fake experts. When I was reading one of the books by Tim Ferriss, maybe it was a 4-Hour Work Week or Tools of Titans, I don't remember. But he was explaining how to create authority. I mean, a persona that has authority. And he was saying, look, ask Oxford or Cambridge or any other renowned university to give a talk on the topic that you are interested in. And even if no one is showing up, maybe because it's like at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's the only time, or 9 o'clock in the evening, it's the only time that they can give you the auditorium for, because you will say, look, I will provide a free lecture on, I don't know, climate change. He said, film your performance. Then you will be able to tell that I was giving a lecture at Oxford. And then there are websites where so-called experts can post what they can talk about. And this is a website that many journalists use to source their expert opinions from. And then when someone is taking you or the material that you published as an expert, then you can say, okay, so now the New York Post or Washington Post was publishing my material that I was presenting at Oxford. And this is how you became an expert from really nothing, expert to nobody. But you have, I mean, it's not even a lie technically, because you really gave a lecture at Oxford, and a newspaper like BBC, for example, took your article or a part of your lecture at Oxford, and now you're an expert. And this is how we are getting to this world where trust the experts, don't think just trust the experts, became this mantra that they are repeating, but they're creating these fake experts themselves. And this is where we come to this realization that the same thing is happening with the creative society right now, that there is a so-called expert that you mentioned, that she apparently wrote something, but we all know that we have AI tools that can check for plagiarism right now. And I would be curious to see if any of her works pass this test of being unique and new. Have you heard anything about this?
Yes, I know. I've already seen the results. Our participants, of course, went to this website where you can analyze the works of people who claim to be experts in certain fields, and including their university works and, you know, the ones they received their degrees for. And it turned out that there was 98 to 99% plagiary in a majority of the works of this so-called expert. It's really interesting how these fake experts are created, and how such articles as BBC would use certain clerics, the diocese in Chelyabinsk in Kiev, as their authority. And you know what's interesting? That we noticed that later this very Chelyabinsk and Kiev diocese were used in multiple, but first of all, of course, Chelyabinsk was used in articles all over the world. Whenever they were making a new article about Allatra, International Public Movement, or Creative Society, they would always mention Chelyabinsk as authority. Oh, those religious guys, they're experts in religion and they don't like Allatra. When in fact, it was this one guy who goes under last name Putnik, Konstantin Putnik, who is in charge of the local missionary activities over there under Russian Orthodox Church. It was obvious to us that he is a puppet of the world elites, and that he has been already played by them. He is the one who's already been shown everywhere as one of them. But what he did, he organized this witch hunt against creative society in his region, and he showed all the connection, all the small puppets of the world elites they had in this region. And we know they were using them to push their people into higher power, up to the parliament of Russian Federation. And we know how this works, because the very same people were doing the very same thing to destroy Russian Empire, then Soviet Union, and the very same tricks have been used even in the United States, because as you mentioned, JFK was killed after he said the speech about the world elites. They did not want to get exposed. Their power is in the fact that they're acting secretly. Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, he was bringing up multiple times the fact that we have to build a creative society in which people will self-govern, and those who are in so-called government, they only will be executives to bring to life what people want. They will only listen to the people and not dictate to the people. So basically, it's not just some play of words that creative society here and there. This is factually, actually, the very same creative society, self-governance society in which human life is the highest value, that Creative Society project is offering to implement on legal level right now, that Ronald Reagan was talking way back in 1968. And as soon as he was offered to run for presidency, he changed that label. He stopped talking about Creative Society and he switched to Let's Make America Great Again. That became his new motto. Does that remind you of anything? If so, guys, I want to remind you that everyone has a family, even Donald Trump, and he doesn't want to end up like JFK. And if you have hopes that one politician will come and change something, it will never happen, because they all know that there are certain things you cannot talk about openly. But what's interesting, these people, they always have their own signs, you know, kind of like handshakes. And at the International World Forum somewhere out there, where this European and American elites meeting up, they always put a bowl of apples. And you know, apple symbolizes the original sin. And they all were taken and showing this to the camera. And Donald Trump was the only one who refused to take an apple. So he showed clearly that he is not part of these so-called elites. But that's just symbolic. It doesn't matter that much. What matters is that millions of people started speaking up around the world, and this is the wave that we have been waiting for. Right now is probably the most important moment in history, when the more people speak about this, the less power have those who stayed in shadow for too long ruling the people. And we know they were trying to use this case in Chelyabinsk to also rage against the main patriarch of Russian Orthodox Church, because this cult has its people everywhere. So what's interesting, when we studied closely what was Konstantin Putnik writing about in his articles, turned out he was calling for a coup against the governmental structures in Russia, and the coup was supposed to be done by the army and was supposed to be supported by the people. And that's exactly what happened 6 months after. We know not so long time ago there was an attempt to do that. And for those who don't like Russian Federation and so on, I would like to remind that if the chaos starts over there, nobody benefits from that. But what's interesting, that it was all organized by the very same elites who were stood behind the destruction of the United States, because they are not interested in keeping strong, independent countries everywhere. And we know that fall down of the United States started from 9/11. And when I moved to the US more than a decade ago, I know that many people were saying that, you know, this is not America anymore. You should have been here in mid-90s. Then you would see, in the 80s, 90s, you would see the real America. Clean streets, people were wealthy and happy and prosperous, beautiful country. Right now, it's the fall down. It's the fall down of the empire, and we witnessing it before of our eyes, and we cannot make sense of that. Like, how is it that purposely our cities are being filled with dirt and scum and drugs, and police do nothing? You go to the downtown San Francisco, you see homeless people shooting heroin and smoking crack in front of the police officers, and they do nothing. And it just doesn't fit in your head. How is it possible that this is being done and popularized, and they giving away the kids for drug addicts to shoot drugs up their veins? You know, I have friends who have diabetes and they cannot get insulin sometimes, or you have to stand in lines, or you have to go for special kind of insurance to cover that stuff, and that's very expensive. They're not gonna give you insulin for free if you have diabetes, but they're gonna give you a free kit to shoot drug up your veins if you have crack addiction, heroin addiction, and so on. They just simply promoting it. And one of the jokes that was going around regarding the crack pipes, they started giving crack pipes to the people, and unless you smoke one, that's really all these people who came to power after 9/11. You wouldn't let them run an ice cream van. But these people, for some reason, this shit show is run in the biggest, the most powerful country in the world. And we know that the country is falling apart. They spend in money trillions of dollars on fighting CO2. They officially invest instead of nuclear energy into the green energy, which is falling apart and collapsing, which is unreliable and so on. And we know where it leads to. It leads to world chaos. And the very same thing, like you wouldn't expect Soviet Union to fall apart or Berlin Wall to fall down a year before that happened. We're seeing the collapse of the most powerful country in the world. And we've been on the edge of the civil war past election, and only God knows what's going to happen on November 2nd or beginning of November in 2024. And add to this a high rise of the extreme climatic events, and you have this cocktail of chaos in which some hidden forces trying to grab the biggest piece of the pie, which doesn't make sense. But nothing makes sense in this world right now, and we're at this brink where we either gonna end this darkness and build a creative society in which all of us will prosper, or this climatic Cerberus, which is gaining power, will finish the whole thing for all of us, all this madness that have been happening. And what is interesting that I'm seeing on comments on TikTok, many people calling for the end of the world, but this is crazy too, because where's your instinct to survive? Are you really that brainwashed? Are you really that affected by the people who gain power in the religious structures and so on, who have been hiding the truth from the people for centuries, for millennia? One of the things that was recently published everywhere, and we know it from Sensei 4 book, which was banned in Russia, that Peter and Paul performed magic rituals to rule over people. The very same people who are in charge of world religions are doing the very same thing right now to rule the people. So when people saying that it's good if the end of the world comes, I want to ask you, are you guys really that much affected by their magic rituals, or why wouldn't you want to survive and build a decent society in which people want to be happy? And when we're talking about implementation of creative society project, what it means in a nutshell, it means unification around one idea, that we as people, we want to live happy, we want to live prosperous, we want to live decent lives. And what is there? Is it impossible to build this world? It's really not a problem. We know in United Arab Emirates, Alex, how long it takes for the police to show up when you really need them?
Oh, I would say about 5 to 7 minutes. I don't have the official statistics, but judging by our own experience, it was just domestic disturbance with the noise at very early hours in the morning from neighbors. But in 7 minutes, they were already about 90 floors up. So I would say pretty immediate response. And it's interesting that you are mentioning Paul. We talked about also in the previous episode. The thing is that it was Paul who laid out the foundation for all the clerics of Christianity, that they are above the states. They had these 85 apostolic rules that they respect and they abide by them, that we don't know actually. But this is why we are seeing this kind of behavior from the guys in Chelyabinsk, for example. I mean, in city of Plast, in Chelyabinsk region, because for them, since they have this authorization, this permission from the founder of their enterprise, Paul, they think they can openly criticize officially elected government, and they can incite people to violence and to overthrowing the government. Actually, this idea, of labeling everyone as bad, this is what they are employing all the time. And when we see the cooperation between different news outlets that base their... Actually, it's not even an article, it's a witch hunt again. Every time when we are seeing people talking about this and that, and even the hot topic of climate, everyone is labeled, okay, so if you are against, you are a climate denier. We've been through this as well. We've been labeled climate deniers. This is also very funny because we were saying about the dangers of changing climate years ago. We've been tracking climate since 1995. And the result of this scientific work, this is how we track down the climatic Cerberus. This is why we are talking about the events that are happening all around the world with confidence, because the mathematic model is being confirmed with each and every passing day. I don't know, these guys, maybe they think that they are invincible because really they are doing everything just in front of our eyes, but without anyone noticing. But guys, we track down the climatic Cerberus. It would not take long before we find who is pulling the strings regarding everything else. When you have the missing pieces of the puzzle, looking at the life even that we lived at this short period of time, we can see that, okay, now that we have these keys, we can interpret all the history differently. We can see that, for example, the last speech of JFK that they did not want people to know about. And of course, this art of doing everything in front of our eyes, pointing fingers, labeling someone as really bad for society, like a public enemy, it worked for many, many decades, centuries, and even millennia. But time has come for people to unite, because the only thing that maybe people don't realize is that they are just several people, maybe several dozens. But we are millions. People in the trenches during wars, they don't want this. They don't need this. They would really prefer staying at home with their relatives and going about their life. But they are forcefully taken into the army and brought to the forefront of the battlefield. They don't want this. But people who really are behind, and these are not even the ones that everyone is talking about. Everyone's talking about Rothschilds, Rockefellers, or Soros and the like. They are financing everything, so they are the ones to blame. But again, as we said previously, they are just pawns that this sect is readily sacrificing every time they are replacing things, okay, and they can blame this or that person for all the bad stuff that was happening. And then they move on, they put just another person, another Putnik in place, and then they're doing their small part of the job without even having the idea, without having a big picture. Like a small screw in the machine is doing his part, and then the whole house just crumbles. This is the falling of empires. We've seen already several during our lifetimes. We've been through this. We've been with this with Soviet Union, with Ukraine. And every time we see that someone is being selected, chosen to bear the responsibility and the guilt for everything, this idea is being heavily promoted everywhere. When you see this pattern, just as an exercise, take a look at the events that happened during your lifetime. Write us in the comments, what do you think? Did you find something interesting in your experience? Having these small keys that open big doors, I would say, to the world around us. When you see these patterns, how do you see the world now? What is your outlook on what happened? But also, moving forward, the best part is that once you know how not to do, how not to act, you can select a different way of living, and this different way of living is creative society. This is what we've been talking about, that guys, when we are all separated, everyone just doing his own stuff, nothing good will happen. All these separations that were being introduced in our lives, like the race, the many genders right now, and the things that really don't even exist in the real world, we're still being separated every time on different opinions, who likes what, who thinks what. Of course, this is the best part for them, because the more fragmented is the society, the easier it is to gain control and manipulate the opinions of smaller groups. Because, of course, we are 8 billion on this planet, because this is already also an important number. This is an important number because we already can form this egregore of people who can overthrow this whole system. We have this chance to unite and change not how only we live, but how our descendants will live. And this is really inspiring. I don't know, for me it is inspiring. Tell us what you think.
Oh, absolutely. Right now we're at the crossroads. A couple of days ago, Elon Musk changed the Twitter's logo from that bird to the X, which, when I was asked, well, what is happening here? I said, this, guys, is crossroads of the humanity. Right now, we're at that very intersection. And the X that represents this crossroads is very symbolic because from here, we either go into the creative society for thousands of years of our lives, because life prolongation is reality in the creative society, to millions and billions of years for the human civilization to develop through galaxies and through universe, to spread life that is worth living on other planets. We know how many exoplanets, kind of like Earth but empty, there are in the universe, and these possibilities are tremendous. Or if we continue to listen to Sputnik-like people and other pawns of the global elites who are only struggling to gain power and whose only goal in life is to gain control of population and to control people. They want money and power. They want to rule the world. They want this small little sect of gatekeepers or guardians to be dominant on our planet. They want to unify the world. They want to destroy empires like Russia, United States, China, India, and on those pieces of the empires, they build their own universe, kind of like they did with Roman Empire. They suggested to Constantine to pass one religion, and he was a very smart man. He knew that divide and conquer is the best way. When you have multiple religions, you can play them, you can, manipulate those priests and rule everyone. But somehow they convinced him to pass Christianity, the religion of Antichrist, Peter and Paul's religion, who went directly against Jesus and made their religion on the opposite of what Jesus was teaching about. And not too many people know Paul never met Jesus in his life, but he was famous for prosecuting the very first followers of Jesus, who were called not Christians with I, but Christians, because Christos Logos means the rightful teaching. And this is where the name is coming from. But because Paul, his real name is Saul, was born, first of all, with Roman Empire citizenship, which was a high privilege at those times. And then he was very sophisticated in multiple languages. He played on those words where, they were in Judea, they were waiting for Messiah, and Christ was similar to Messiah in their language. So he played and he said, oh, it's better to be Christian than Christian, because as a Christian, you simply following someone's rightful teaching. But as a Christian, we're gonna put some oil on your forehead and you're gonna be kind of like kings, because oil was very expensive at those times. And this is how playing on the feeling of pride of people who want to be king-like, they want to feel this feeling of importance. This is how people being manipulated. And you can see the very same scheme. How do you think the world elites manipulating people? Somebody comes to Mr. Konstantin Sputnik and tells him what to do? No, they play on his pride, and they don't do it directly. They do it through the third, fourth, fifth connections. Some friend of his wife tells them some idea, and then later this chain goes all the way to Sputnik, and the idea is being indoctrinated in his head that he's important, he's too smart, but nobody knows about his genius. He could be ruling the country, because what does Putin know? Sputnik could rule better than Putin, but we have to replace the government, he starts saying in his speeches and articles. He's seen how people come into his direct boss, Metropolitan Bishop Orlov, kissing his hands and falling down on their knees. And don't you think he wants to live the same? He's much smarter in his head, he thinks, than that Metropolitan Bishop. But why do they kiss his hands? They should kiss Sputnik's hands. They should be at his feet. And this is how, through the feeling of pride, he starts talking things which are convenient for the world elites. How do you think the whole CO2 thing was born in the head of this one little-known professor from Pennsylvania University who forged, apparently he knew exactly what he was doing, but how? Even, when ClimateGate emails were published, it was very easy to see how he was manipulating with this idea that was put in his head by somebody way smarter than he is. And the idea was that, even if the graph is not exact, even if it's fraudulent, the global warming is still too important. It's too much of a problem. So we have to save humanity even by fabricating the data. It doesn't matter if the graph is real or not real. The impending threat of climate change and global warming is too important. And he convinced himself that he's doing a good thing here and gets a little famous and gets a bit more promoted and gets a better spot under the sun in this world. Gets professorship, gets promoted all over, gets invited to TV shows. He gets to teach Leo DiCaprio and Hollywood stars and advise them on how to live their lives and so on. So you see, this manipulation always goes through pride. But guys, pride should be used not for domination over other people. Our real pride should be pointed at speaking the truth and voicing the facts that liberate people from manipulation, liberate people from being pawns in this game. And the truth about climate Cerberus that has been voiced at the Creative Society International online forums. Our survival is in unity. One forum. There is a way out, the second one, and the most recent one on which the whole religious fraud was exposed, called Global Crisis, Who is Jesus Christ to Us. All this information liberates people. You cannot manipulate people when they know the truth. They know that CO2 has nothing to do. They know that our whole civilization were led into destroying the ecosystem, but not through CO2, through microplastic and pollution in the ocean. For hundreds of years we've been polluting ocean and changed it on molecular level, so it's not working its main purpose to radiate the temperature, the heat that's coming up from the core of our planet. It should be radiated through the ocean and atmosphere into the space, but it's not working. The lower levels of the ocean warming up and they not passing this heat further because we destroyed the ocean. And that happened why? Because someone's pride 100 years ago to rule the world, to dominate over people, because of someone's pride, technologies that would allow us to have clean energy, clean environment, fossil fuel-free energy generators, was banned. It was shelved for hundreds of years. We started using fossil fuels. We started polluting this oil and plastic made out of it into the ocean. And the amount of barrels of oil that is spilled into the ocean within 1 year is enough to cover the whole planet with a thin layer of oil. Just facts voiced at the international online forum Global Crisis. There is a way out, guys. And they say, let's replace it with renewables like wind turbines and solar panels. Guys, do you know how much lubricants made from fossil fuels are used in one wind turbine during the lifespan? Most people don't even think about it. Well, please check the facts and you will see how much of a fraud this whole idea is that we're not using fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are being used everywhere. And Creative Society is talking about true solution from fossil fuels, fuel-free generators, magnetic generators. And we know they exist. We know that most people who were talking about them even 5-10 years ago unfortunately are not with us anymore. The most famous one was actually a Ukrainian gentleman who went to Korea and founded the SAV Infinity company in Korea, in Seoul. And during the pandemic, the very beginning of the pandemic, he was already having the solutions which he was about to sell online. They had working examples of fuel-free generators, and then at the beginning of the pandemic, all of a sudden, he's not with us anymore, this gentleman, and his company is for some reason not being promoted, the solutions not being sold on market. The very same thing happened at the beginning of the early 2000s to a gentleman in Japan who made a car that was working on water. And you can find multiple examples. Actually, most of them were also voiced at the international online forum Global Crisis. There is a way out. Right now, we have these technological solutions, but they are not being implemented. And the only way to change it is to change our pride from the feeling of necessity to dominate over others, to necessity to actually build a better future for everyone else. And when it comes to attempts to label somebody as something negative, we see in two main things were played multiple times throughout history. First, you can name them a cult, and second, you can play the anti-Semite or racial card. And those things, we can expect them to be played as well. So up front, we're seeing that creative society has nothing to do with religion. Allatra has nothing to do with religion. Allatra exposed all religions. If you read the book, you can find it out yourself. And we have participants in all the countries, in all the nations. And Israeli participants just had a conference on which they presented information how beneficial it's going to be for the people of Israel as well to have creative society. And that is the only solution to end Arab-Israeli conflict and all the conflicts, in fact, in the world, because there will be those who make profit and power on these conflicts. So, friends, I encourage everyone to check these facts, to check it firsthand and start speaking up, because we don't have that much time to share this information. Maybe within a year or two, we're gonna regret about the fact that we lost so much time in our doubts, and nothing stops people from sharing the information other than, again, feeling of pride, that what would people think of me, or what if I'm gonna lose something if I start speaking up? What if the elite's gonna come for me? Well, my friend, the ego has to be really big to think that elite's gonna come for you. Elites have a lot of stuff to do, and me and Alexey and other participants of the creative society, we all know that it's a great feeling of relief when you actually start taking fears of your shoulders and taking the silence of your chest and start speaking up. So this is what I'm asking you, friends. If you're hearing this, start speaking up. Make your videos, TikToks, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube Shorts, whatever works for you, Rumbles, Twitters, X, whatever it's called. Just start speaking up, because your voice matters.
It's true that we can see that this shadow power, all they want is just to get to big money, but money will not help solve any of the issues that you just talked about. The thing is that people who are listening to this whole propaganda and falling for it, meaning that our creative society is such a threat to society, but what kind of threat really is there into wanting to live a good life where people don't have to worry about tomorrow, like what they will eat, how they will be able to heal their bodies, these kind of things. If we really get to the basics of it, we are really just trying not to go hungry or without energy, without housing and things like that. Just have a look at things that really are being conveyed. You will see that there's nothing really frightening to 99.99% of people. It's all that people want. And if you are afraid of asking your neighbor about the same, how would you like to live your life? Okay, but who is really not letting you ask this question? Is it the voice in your head? But how do we overcome fears? We act despite having this fear, this emotion of fear. You just go, and every time you step over your fears, you're advancing. This is very important, guys, that it's not about acting like a hero or being brave. It's something that you can do for yourself, for your kids, for your relatives. Just have a look around. Everyone is just saying, again, another record of something, another record of heat, a heat wave, or flooding, or drought in some places. We can see hail the size of a melon, 12 centimeters hail in Italy in month of July. Any month, this type of hail is lethal. It destroys everything. Let me put it another way. Would you like to spend all your life always fearing something and not expressing yourself, not doing what you want? But you can have this life that was portrayed with the regeneration capsule, with the matter replicator and the fuel-free generators. Everyone will have the possibility to experience this in a really, really short amount of time. If we overcome the fear of not talking to a neighbor. And as you said on the previous podcasts, like you didn't even realize how great these people were. Once you start talking with them without wanting to push an idea upon them, without wanting them to change their opinion, you just tell them what matters to you, what you think is interesting and will be interesting to them. And then they make their own decision. And the idea of creative society is not to impose creative society on anyone, but it is to create the conditions where people know the possibility of changing the way of living to a creative society from the consumer's format, and then being able to make an informed choice, an informed decision whether they want to live in this world or they don't, or they just maybe they're fine with the world that we are living in today. And this is it. We are just creating the conditions. We're not pushing anyone on anything else. Yes, speaking about you and I, for example, we really want to live in this kind of world, and this is why we are passionately promoting this information. We are speaking about it. We really try to convey all the benefits of the creative society to everyone. But if people don't want it, okay, it's their sacred right to choose, and no one can infringe on it. So for us, the main idea is to let everyone know what was happening, how we got to this point where, attacking not even ordinary people, but killing presidents, leaders of nations, just for them saying what is happening. This is crazy, guys. I would encourage everyone just to do your own research and tell us if you find this information dangerous. And then we can answer more questions that may arise, because people, when they really are interested in something and when they ask questions, it is because they already start, trying this new world on them, like trying a new piece of clothing. They are trying to think how things would work in this new world. And it is normal, because anyone who tries to understand a new concept to them, they start asking questions. It's worse not to ask questions and stay in your fears than to just ask the question and without thinking what people will think about you. It's your life and the life of your loved ones. This is what's on the line really today. And this is why it is important to make your own understanding of what is creative society and would you like to live in a society like this.
Absolutely, it's a freedom of choice of all people. We just, making an offer suggestion. Hey guys, you can live and live really well in a creative society if you want it. But if you don't want, that's the freedom of choice of all people. We cannot affect it. The only thing we can do is give people choice to actually have this freedom. And what is strange, we had a call with this lady yesterday who found out, and she was like, oh, but how can people live actually without fear? How can people be provided with all necessities to live freely? Would people still do something? There is such a small minority of people who have been indoctrinated with the thing that people should live in fear. Like the only reason why you've never been given free energy devices in the beginning of 20th centuries where they were already available is because they want you to live in fear and dependency. The only reason why economy is so diverse, but not in a good way right now, it's diverse in the sense of creating collapses in different countries constantly and continuously and creating debts and creating life in debt. It is because it makes you dependent on the current financial system. You're not given resources enough to survive. You know that any economic collapse can happen at every moment. You can get fired and stay without means to survive, pay off your loan, lose your house, and not being able to feed your kids. That's a constant fear that you live with through your whole life. There was not a single day, remember one day, my friend, where you lived with no fear at all. You're not not going to remember it because there was no such day ever since the childhood when your parents, first you were living in a fear of parents, then you were living in a fear of not being able to get into the university you wanted to get into, then not being able to get a job. Then you, even when you got a job, you live in a fear of losing this job. You live in a fear that your partner is going to leave you, that something's going to happen to this and that. And creative society is a solution. It's a life with no fear. Can you even imagine what it's like to live with no fear? Imagine you won a lottery ticket and you are covered and you're not dependent on anything and anyone. Now, this is the life that everyone can live when they provided with basic necessities, when everyone knows that they are covered and nothing bad can happen, that their life tomorrow will be only better than what it is today. Now, that is the choice that is being offered. That is the pride we should use to actually thrive, to speak up about the world we want to live in. And we unify on the idea of building the world in which people live truly freely. And this is the country that we're privileged to live in, that was created by the people who rejected to pay taxes to the empire, the people who really wanted to live on their piece of land and live freely from no taxation burden from somebody who has no relation to them at all. This is the very core, the foundation of freedom-loving people. And you know, it's throughout the years, and we've been saying through 9/11 it was completely destroyed. Probably the 9/11 when people were really unified by the grief on September 12th. But how it was used? It was used to, first of all, hide all the, again, money that disappeared, trillions of dollars disappeared. Then people were convinced, and very few people actually believed it, but I believe so as they believe that the Holy Church is there. There are also few people who believe that some cavemen from Afghanistan, Mujahideens, were able to come to the United States and put explosive on every level of World Trade Center and take it down with the speed of free fall. If you drop the metal ball from the roof of any of World Trade Center towers, it would fall down within 11 seconds. And that is the speed with which towers collapsed without making damage to any other property around, except the building number 6, which fall down as a manufacturer explosive was put in the middle of it, and it simply collapsed inside. And there was no damage from even imaginary airplanes to it. Now, guys, if you think Mujahideens were able to do that, then you probably should go and kiss some priest's hands and other body parts, because there is nothing that can help you. But the fall down of the empire began at that day, because all the illegal activities that were justified by fighting terrorism were applied over there. And as you can see, fighting extremism is always the excuse which is being used to fight those who speak an inconvenient truth. And eventually what they're trying to do with Creative Society and Allatra is label it as extremist organizations. And for that, you can see the very same manipulative technique that has been, you know, they've been laying ground, they've been laying foundation for this whole thing to fabricate these cases and so on in a very specific way. Each article, each episode on the fabricated news episodes that were popping up in different countries, they were done at the very same way. They taken extremist organizations, they taken legitimately religious cults, they describe and look how awful those guys are, look what these people have done, look what they've done to whatever people were doing in those organizations. And then in between they say, oh, and by the way, Allatra is one of them. Based on what? Excuse me. This is a completely manipulative technique. When Putnik was sitting in the court of justice and there was a lawyer who was asking questions based on what you call in Creative Society a religious organization. Oh, it's connected to Allatra. Excuse me, based on what? Because there are certain participants. Igor Mikhailovich is over there and over there as well. Well, excuse me, is that it? Well, yeah, that's it. Do you have any other evidence? No, I don't. Do they perform religious rituals in Allatra? No, they don't. Do they make prayers? No, they don't. The whole evidence, there was no evidence, basically. This whole farce was fabricated based on personal opinion of Mr. Putnik and his couple of buddies, which one of them, the second witness, was his student and subdiacon in local church. And the lady was the co-author in the books, and they were basically sitting at the same desk in the local organization where she works. And then she was, so as him, caught with copy-pasting other people's articles and works and claiming it to be their own. So this very low-profile people who couldn't achieve anything in life with their talents, knowledge, and anything else. Like when Putnik was asked by the lawyer, excuse me, what's your education? What's your level of education that you making such claim about religious organization? Are you a theologist? He's like, no. Then who are you? He says, I'm a historian. And the lawyer says, excuse me, this is not an education degree. This is not an education. What's your profession? It's written in your diploma. He says, oh, I'm a history teacher. Well, we looked up how he got his degree. He received it online at the age of 56 in the local college. This whole thing is ridiculous. The same thing with the second witness, the Manturov, when they asked him, what's your education? Are you a theologist? He's like, no. What did you bring to prove that Allatra is a religious organization? And he shows up to articles from printouts from some websites, and they're like, excuse me, is it expert's opinion? No, it's a printouts from online forums. And with this sort of people, like, I feel sorry for global elites that they have to deal with such idiots. Excuse me. But these clowns are exactly the people that are convenient for the elites, because their pride is blinding their eyes. Blinded by pride, they doing evil things against humanity because they think they're doing better for themselves. But what they are not seeing is that, lead by this ego and pride, they depriving themselves of the future that is beneficial for them too, because creative society participants are fighting for the right to live decently, even for those who are smearing the creative society, even for those who are smearing Allatra international public movement. This is the key difference. And we can take multiple millions of examples. The same game has been played by the elites every time when it comes to climate change, when it comes to those fraudulent graphs, when it comes to the narrative that you should eat insects, when all of a sudden multiple Hollywood actors popping up with the jars of worms and insects and says, hey, this is your new food, it's very beneficial. And you can see how people were also promoted by the very same elites. They get the Iron Man role in the very big movie. And then people who are starring with the very same Robert Downey Jr. who popped up at Stephen Colbert's with a jar of insects and says, hey, this is so delicious. And Stephen Colbert, who you would think is one of those people who are in fame and could be participating in the Western liberal elites, even he was like, excuse me, Robert, are you serious? Are you trying to convince me to eat bugs? And Robert Downey Jr. says, I wouldn't play you, man. This is real. I wouldn't play you like that. This is real. This was passed in European Union as a food supply now. This is legal to eat. And Stephen Colbert was like, I'm not buying that, And then I was watching interviews with Terrence Howard, who was a co-star in Iron Man 1, and then he disappeared from the franchise. And he was saying that when certain things happened and he started calling Robert Downey Jr. to ask what's going on, the guy simply wasn't picking up the phone for a couple of years. So that tells you about moral standards of the person who was claiming to be his best friend and so on. So these people are moved by their ego. And again, why are they doing this? Because somebody whispered at their ear, hey guy, the next big thing will be eating bugs. It's very beneficial for the planet. You can save the environment. All you have to do is invest some money into this new company called Insects and promote it everywhere. Yes, you will make a lot of money on it too because it's gonna pop up, but also you're gonna do a good thing. And then next thing you see, this guy becomes vegan. He looks worse than what he looked like when he was a drug addict, and he's promoting insects. And this is crazy, like the whole world, like you can see that these ideas indoctrinated in the heads of people like Robert Downey Jr., Putnik, and so on, they never went beneficial for the people themselves. they messed up their lives, but what they have done, they went against their humanity with these inhumane things. And you can take a look at, I don't know, Bill Gates, who's promoting the very same thing. He's running around the globe, traveling in his jet, emitting lots of CO2, saying that people should stop using energy travel and so on, and just live under permanent lockdown in their houses. Why is that being done? Because he was apparently suggested some kind of a deal as well, and he thinks it's beneficial for him and his kids. But what you don't see over there is that, what is beneficial in it if climate Cerberus does not care about your financial status, about the size of your house at the shore of the Pacific Ocean. It doesn't matter for climate Cerberus what kind of jet you were flying or how much money you collected on your bank accounts. What climate Cerberus is going to do is going to cause great disasters that we could have avoided if we passed Creative Society on legal level in this year. And then we would already be in the transition period from the beginning of next year. We could unify scientific potential and come up with a solution that guarantees billions of years to human civilization. And those would be lives of thriving, of really living as human beings could only dream. And this is all possible today. But people have been so misinformed by these elites for so many years that they cannot even, for many of them, it's even hard to imagine what it is. And that's why we invite you guys to watch the visuals, to actually see what your life could be like in the Creative Society. If you open International Online Forum, Global Crisis, there is a way out. Hour 6 hours, 10 minutes into the 12-hour video, you can come across Alexey's presentation of a new model of economy, which works on a completely different foundation. And Alexey was presented, but you cannot imagine how many people were standing behind the development of the idea, the leading world economists who wouldn't show their face because that would destroy their career, but they were participating in this presentation. And then the video in which Robert Mikita from Slovakia was presenting the new self-governance model, how that would work. And then you can see the short clips from California of a man driving through PCH. And as you can see in that video, he's being offered through online voting platform to pass the bill for implementation of fuel-free generators. Free energy will be a possibility and reality for all of us. And all it takes is just start speaking up. So guys, what will we choose? We choose the destruction and elimination of this world, or a decent, happy living for all of us in the Creative Society? Is up to us. And today, no one can say that they didn't know enough. Everyone who hears should speak up. If you're hearing this and not speaking up, you're fooling yourself, my friend. So start speaking up. If Robert Downey Jr. is not embarrassed to promote bugs, you guys should not be embarrassed of speaking up the truth and not afraid to speak up about the Creative Society and how beneficial it is for you and everyone around you.